So we began our readings today with the Gospel according to Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the presence and the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. And they appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighted down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. And just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud a voice came that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one of any of the things they had seen.
The second reading is 2 Corinthians 3:12, 13, 16 through 18. With such hope, we are very bold in what we say, and we are not like Moses, who covered his face with a veil to keep the Israelites from gazing at the radiance as it faded away. But whenever anyone turns to our God, the veil is removed. Now our God is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of our God is, there is freedom. And we, who with unveiled faces reflect our God's glory, grow brighter and brighter as we are being transformed into the image we reflect. This is the work of our God, who is Spirit.
Our final reading is a contemporary reading from Transformation, a meditation on transforming ourselves and our world by John Deere. In the peace of that mountaintop moment, I felt loved by the Creator of the world and experienced new hope for myself and humanity. Not only was I not alone, but I was deeply loved by God. Like the disciples in the story, I was waking up to reality. I perceived an invitation to walk with Jesus down the mountain to Jerusalem, into the heart of the world, where he would risk everything for the love of the whole human race, and where I might dare that same risky, all-inclusive, sacrificial love.
I've been to the mountaintop. How about you? Now, I have to do a confession here this morning. Is that all right? I've got to confess a guilty pleasure. See, on Monday nights, except when we have a board meeting, and then Monday night about 10:30, when I watch my recording, I like to watch The Bachelor. Yes, even The Bachelorette. Yes. I like to pretend that I'm doing social analysis and that I'm reading their personalities and predicting who will last and who won't, who will the troublemakers be, etc. But this, and I know some of you out there watch too, so I know you're laughing, but I've had conversations with a few of you, so I know you do watch. But this past week on The Bachelor, Sean, who's from Dallas, Sean took the dates to Banff. Of course, the show took them to Banff because Sean wouldn't be able to afford to do that. But that aside, they went to Banff, which is in Canada, in Alberta, in case you're not familiar. They had been in Montana and had been in Glacier National Park, and then they just went on further north, due north. They were in Banff, and then a little further up. And I got so excited when this show started, and I had to stop and rewind and pause it and call Shelley in to show her. Because, you see, I spent 2 summers in Banff, 2 months each of those 2 summers at the Banff School of Fine Arts. And there was that first shot, and I could see the school, and I'm like, stop, okay, right there, there's where I stayed, right there. And he took that one woman that date up climbing on Tunnel Mountain. I climbed Tunnel Mountain. Now, I did not do the rock face rappelling that they did. No, I went up this side. They came down this side. But I did climb Tunnel Mountain, and it excited me, and it brought back those memories to see it. And then a little later in that same show, he took another date further up in Alberta, closer to Jasper, to the Columbia ice fields. And they played in the snow. It was a terrible weather day for them. And they went on the Columbia ice fields. Now, the Columbia ice fields straddle the boundary between the Canadian provinces of Alberta and British Columbia. And the Columbia ice field is the largest ice mass in North America south of the Arctic Circle. There are 6 glaciers associated with the ice mass. So if you can imagine sort of like the ice mass here and then fingers coming out that we call glaciers. The whole thing we might understand is a glacier, but they call it an ice mass and then glaciers. And through these glaciers coming off of the Columbia ice field, fresh water flows into 3 different oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So you have the height, so you have some of that continental divide stuff going on, but you have them feeding this. And the waters from this ice field and its 6 related glaciers provide fresh water for water systems that flow through much of Western Canada and the U.S. Isn't that cool? Amen. Now, the glacier that was visited by the Bachelor and by myself, the glacier visited by the Bachelor and myself, this is myself in 2005. This glacier is known as the Athabasca Glacier. Now, on the Bachelor, they really did get on the snow bus and go way up in the top where they played in the snow and were away from the tourists. But here we are at the tourist part. According to research conducted by glacial scientists, the Athabasca Glacier is receding in length and shrinking in volume at an alarming rate. Now, I'm not going to get into all kinds of discussions here about whether there's global warming, but there's weather change. Hello. There just is. And yes, we know that there's been weather changes in the past in history, but we also know that they seem to be happening at a quicker rate right now. The melting rate is faster now than it's been in the last 40 years. Basically, the glacier is losing more moisture than the snowfall from the ice field can replace. And it appears that both warmer weather and a dirtier surface, that's us people and our tourism and whatnot, are causing it to absorb the summer heat quicker and causing more of it to melt. So the glacier, the Athabasca Glacier, as some of the others, are shrinking by 30% every 100 years. So at this rate, they estimate that it'll be completely gone in 300 years. So this is us there in 2005, and we are standing at the tourist thing where they have the restaurant and all the restrooms and everything, and you see a parking lot, and then there's a highway. And you can see the glacier way in the distance. Let's go ahead to the next picture. I'm actually standing on the glacier here, and there are some cones there, and when you were walking up the glacier, you had to walk between the cones. They were trying to protect the glacier from the wear and tear of all of us tourists. This is Reverend Dan Cushell, who's the pastor at MCC of San Diego, and I didn't say who the other person was when the 3 of us were there, and that's Angel Colley, who was with us just a few weeks ago, who had visited us. We all went on vacation together after the general conference in 2005. We took this trip to the ice fields together. This picture, with Dan, you can start to see the cracks. Do you see the cracks in the ice? And you could look down between some of those cracks quite a long ways. So this is that water that's melting and flowing. And go ahead to the next one. And here in some spots you could see it just rushing. When you were walking on it, you could hear it. And it doesn't look like much size now, but for those of you who do watch The Bachelor, I know you saw some more of the big mass. In 1917, there is a picture of that tongue of the Athabasca Glacier coming down. There's a line. Can you see a faint line there? That's the highway, and the snow is right down and over the highway. In 1917, the snow came all the way to where the parking lot of the visitor center is that you saw in the first picture. Can you believe that? And this picture below was taken by the Jasper National Park Services in 2005. And now you can see the highway is at the bottom, and now there's a lake collecting the water. And then there's the little roads on the side, and that's actually where those snow buses start to take people and go up and around before they even get onto the ice and go all the way up onto that top of the ice mass, which is where The Bachelor was filmed. But you can see how far it's retreating. This is a picture of us walking where the snow used to be, and I'm sorry you can't see it in the change here, because I went to this same ice field myself when I was a student at the Banff School of Fine Arts. And that was 1975. And this marker right here says 1975. And that's where the ice was when I went the first time. And now you can't even see the bottom of the tongue of the ice. And we're still walking. From the pictures, you can't even still see the massiveness of it, the size of it. And again, it's hard to see with the contrast in here. But can you see that there's little people all along the bottom of that tongue? And can you see the little specks going up it? Those are people climbing up the tongue. Can you see the size of it? But I just want you to get a sense of the enormity of it and the change. Do you think it would impact you to be walking on that and seeing the power of the ice, the power of the water, the power of the mountains? There we are, still another picture of the walking up to it. You get an idea of how far a walk it was. Like it was long ways now, where there used to be ice. I can tell you that I felt God on that mountaintop glacier. And I can tell you that the clouds came and overcame us as well as we were up there. In fact, we had come from the general conference in Calgary, and it was summer, it was July, so it wasn't cold, but we got up there. You're higher in altitude because you've gone up into the mountains a bit. Then you're hiking up on the ice. That's colder. And then it started to rain, sleet, snow. And we didn't exactly have rain gear with us or good shoes. And let me tell you, walking on the ice while it was raining was treacherous. And I preached a sermon on this once before because the three of us came together and we formed community. We were holding each other and supporting each other and kept each other safe walking on that ice. But it was the way in which that cloud came around us and brought us together in an experience that we will never forget. Angel and Dan and I will always be close because of that shared moment. Up on the mountain, was able to see what had been, where the ice had been, what was happening, and what will happen. And I've tried to show that to you in pictures. Some sense of the past, some sense of the present moment, and some sense of the future. Being on that mountain and seeing, particularly going back and seeing how the ice had moved since I was there in 1975, was a moment of making you fully awake. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa, okay, this is not something we're just talking about. This is real stuff. Kind of wakes you up to it. I've been to the mountaintop. Have you? We have moments when we see something that changes us, that impacts us, that affects our attitudes and our actions. It's transforming moments. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last speech is well known as the mountaintop speech. He said, well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And God's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anyone. Mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm struck that Martin did not try to stay on top of the mountain. He was very clear about his own experience and about others. We've got some difficult days coming. He could see the ice retreating, if you will. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter. I just want to do God's will. Jesus on the mountain chose not to stay there. He was prepared to go back down the mountain. And difficult days were ahead. But it didn't matter. He just wanted to do God's will. Because They both had been to the mountaintop and had seen and experienced the glory of God. I'm struck that Martin does not say, I'm at the mountaintop, as in I'm at the zenith of my career, or I'm having a peak time in my life. He doesn't say that. He says, I've been to the mountaintop. It's a past tense. And yet that experience, that vision enabled him to come back down off that mountain and hold the vision of the experience he'd had. Do you hear me? The moment that he had had, the vision that he'd had, that mountaintop experience was able to give him strength for what did lie ahead. It gave him strength to deal with the injustice that was still in the world. It gave him strength. It continued the vision, and it gave him freedom. I don't fear anyone. I don't fear anything. He had freedom. Even though the world was not free yet, he was free. Is there an amen? Amen. It's a freedom that enables us to be happy, to be not worried, not afraid despite the continuing injustice and threats that were against his life and that often happen against our life. Mountaintop moments can carry us through the valleys that come. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that where the Spirit of God is, there is freedom. Yes? And so in his speaking, in his preaching, in his nonviolent demonstrations for justice, he sought to reconnect people with the loving, just Spirit of God, to find their freedom in God, and to work for freedom in the law, but to find freedom in God. And so with unveiled face, Martin and others reflected God's glory. You know, they say that Moses put a veil over his face, that it was too much for the people to bear. But since Christ, there's been no veil. It's torn away, so that the glory of God can be seen in ordinary people. Hello? So that we could see the glory of God in Martin. And if you watch any of those videos when he is speaking, watch any of that film, can you not see the Spirit of God upon him as he would deliver these speeches? Martin and others reflecting the glory of God. They grew brighter and brighter, being transformed into the image they reflected. The image of God. I believe that he was fully awake to the danger that surrounded him and to the glory of God that also surrounded him. And he was fully awake to the presence of God, both on the mountaintop and in the valley experiences. He knew the presence of God went with him. So let me ask you this morning, are you fully awake? Or are you heavy with sleep? And it's not about sleeping, it's about our consciousness. Are you fully awake to the life God is giving you? Hello? Checking. Are you fully awake? Are you fully conscious of the transformative divine presence? Or are you just weary with the experiences of this life? Sometimes when things depress us, we just want to sleep. And some of us do that spiritually. Life is hard, it's depressing, and we just want to sleep. The disciples were tired. They were heavy with sleep. Many of us are tired after years and years with HIV. Many of us are tired after coming out and coming out and coming out and coming out. And each time risking vulnerability and having to take care of the other person that we come out to at the very same moment. Whether that's coming out as gay, as lesbian, as bisexual, or as transgender, there's many of us that have that weariness. And let's also acknowledge that our allies also come out. Amen? And many of them are weary and tired of guilt by association or having to explain yet again. There can be a weariness in the work of justice. But God invites us to be fully awake to the presence of God in which there is freedom and in which there is energy. You may be tired with the stress of work, economic or personal life challenges, or health challenges. So what do we do when we're tired? We need to return to the mountaintop. Yes? You know, they say that it's true. Doctors will talk about it, and you can check some different writings, Google it if you want, that going to a mountaintop, that there's a change that happens with that air pressure and the richness of oxygen or the thinness of the air that's just good for us to breathe. I think also it's because the air is clean. That's a big one. But going to mountains renews our physical bodies. It renews our mind, and it renews our spirit. So we're reminded that we need those mountaintop experiences. We need to go to the mountain to be in the presence of God. Now, I'm in the presence of God all the time. But Scripture always talks about metaphorically about going to the mountain, which means making a trip intentionally to be in the presence of God. It doesn't always mean literally going up a mountain. So if you don't like to climb, you're still good. Some applause for that. All right. But we need to get to a place where we go into that intentional presence of God and have a mountaintop view, a glimpse of what was, what is, and what is promised. I've been to the mountaintop. Have you? It was exhilarating. The air was refreshing and energizing, life-giving. So I'm asking you today, do you need a fresh vision? Do you need some cleansing air? Do you need freedom from worry and fear? And are you prepared to reflect the glory of God? Do people see God in you? One of the authors I found when I was doing research for my sermon, and I lost the credit, so I just want to say somebody anonymous here, that this is not me, talked about the ongoing theological debate about whether or not the transfiguration happened. Is it really a post-resurrection story, or if it happened at this point? But it goes on to say that the debate, and debating what part's factual and what part is metaphorical, but all that debate can distract us from the contemplative power of spiritual encounters with dreams and visions and epiphanies that we receive in mountaintop experiences. So, in other words, don't get hung up on the details, but listen for that presence of God that spurs us on to faith and action. You know, these encounters with God are mysterious and inexplicable, yet they usually are followed by an unmistakable sense of calling. Somehow getting that clean air also leads to clarity of thought, and you have a clearer sense of who you are and what you are called to do. These mountaintop experiences, people testify to their encounter with the divine and a resulting imperative to do acts of justice. You know, I speak about global warming, about weather change, because I've seen it firsthand. I've walked where the ice was, and I've walked where it is no more. Do you know what I mean? It's real. So it makes me conscious of that. So many people have had these mountaintop experiences that have transformed their lives. People like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and people like Gandhi, and people like Sojourner Truth and Teresa of Avila. How about you? Have you had a mountaintop experience that's changed you? Peter, the disciple, he was always kind of brash and rushing into things. And Peter's having this moment, and like, what will we do? And he wanted to build 3 structures, monuments, call them dwellings or tents, but something that the spirit of each one could dwell in and remain there. He wanted to build a little dwelling for Moses, and one for Elijah, and one for Jesus, kind of trying to capture the moment, a place for them to dwell. But you know, here's the truth, people. We cannot grasp or hold on to these divine visions. We can't hang on to them in order to stay in the moment. I could not dwell, I could not live on top of the ice field. No one can live on top of the ice field. You can visit it, but you can't live there. We cannot stay in that one moment, on that one high, if you will. But rather, we want to grasp its meaning. Not possess it, but grasp and hold on to the dream, to the vision, to the experience, to live into its gifts and possibilities and promise and teaching. There's a woman named Mary Oliver, a book called Thirst. She has this wisdom. The place I want to get back to is where in the pine woods In the moments between the darkness and the first light, 2 deer came walking down the hill, and when they saw me, they said to each other, "Okay, this one is okay. Let's see who she is and why she's sitting on the ground like that, so quiet, as if asleep or in a dream, but anyway, harmless." And so they came on their slender legs and gazed upon me, not unlike the way I go out to the dunes and look and look and look into the faces of the flowers. And then one of them leaned forward and nuzzled my hand. And what can my life bring to me that could exceed that brief moment? For 20 years, I've gone every day to the same woods, not waiting exactly, just lingering. Such gifts bestowed can't be repeated. If you want to talk about this, come to visit. I live in the house near the corner, which I have named Gratitude. Come with gratitude. Don't look to go back, but come with gratitude and expectation of another experience. Be open to it. Look for another experience of the transforming divine presence. Let time with God transform us from when we went up to the mountain to how we are after the mountain experience. To breathe differently, to have different images lifting our hearts and our minds, to have a whole body, mind, and spirit experience. Recently, there's a person in this church who came to talk with me and then came and just sat in this sanctuary and sat still for a while and had a powerful experience of being fully present and fully awake. The voice of God on that mountaintop said, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And being still and listening was a mountaintop experience, sitting right here. And it was transformative, life-giving, vision-changing. You can't go back to a particular experience and have it be exactly the same. I've said that. I can't go back to 1975 and have the ice field be the same. I'm not the same in so many ways. So even my experience of the ice field would be different because I am already different. We can't go back to any one particular holy moment you have experienced, but we can go to another. We can have less talking and more listening, less doing and more being. Be still and listen in the presence of God, so that when we come out of that experience, we are able to do and be in the freedom, power of divine vision. You know, there's a balance of study, prayer, and action. Study that is often associated with Moses and the Torah. Action with the prophets who spoke a prophetic word about injustice. And Jesus, who also did things, and we often think of him as the doer, but Jesus took time for prayer. For prayer. And where the gospel writer has the story located is before Jesus' most difficult days, he goes to the mountaintop for prayer, being still with the divine presence. Can't stay there, can't go back to it, but I can return intentionally time and time again to the divine presence. I can return again and again to prayer. Throughout the Gospels, you see Jesus goes off to pray. Jesus goes off to pray, goes up to pray, That's the message I want us to take away today. His journey to Jerusalem and to the cross began with prayer. He went up into the mountaintop, that symbol of going into the presence of God, going up to pray. And Jesus is revived and renewed for what is yet to come. How about you? How about you? Do you need a mountaintop experience? I've been to the mountaintop, not just the Columbia ice fields and not just Tunnel Mountain, but also when I studied in Aspen. It was a time when spiritually I had been apart from God. I knew somehow that God was always with me, but I had stopped going to church. I had somewhat walked away. But while I was in Aspen, we climbed a mountain. And I've told some of you this story before. When I got to the top of the mountain, I could do nothing else than sing out loud, "How great thou art." And it was a moment that I knew God was with me, had always been with me, would always be with me, and I was ready to go back to church. I saw God's work. It was transforming, and it drew me back to God. I've been to the mountaintop. How about you? As John Deere wrote, in the peace of that mountaintop moment, I felt loved by the Creator of the world and experienced new hope for myself and humanity. Not only was I not alone, but I was deeply loved by God. Like the disciples in the story, I was waking up to reality. And I perceived an invitation to walk with Jesus down the mountain into the heart of the world, where Jesus would risk everything for the love of the whole human race, and where I might dare that same risky, all-inclusive, sacrificial love. Amen. I invite you to pray with me. The prayer is on the screen. Would you pray it with me? Lord of the mountaintop, God of dazzling clouds, be with me when I come down from the height of worship to face a world that didn't see what I saw in you. Show me what to do. Lord of the mountaintop experience, God of dazzling clothes, show me how to be, change me, transfigure me, so that this world might see you in me and worship you. Amen. I invite us to sing this song as part of our response.